Our recording. All right. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. This is the end of November 2021, and we are beginning the book of Romans, Paul's epistle to the Romans, which is the largest letter that Paul has written, slightly longer than 1 Corinthians. And people might not know this, but mostly the letters that we have in the New Testament from Paul are organized, I think, primarily by size. So even though Romans shows up first, Romans is absolutely not the first letter that Paul wrote. So that's why it goes Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, because 1 Corinthians is a little bit shorter, but it groups the Corinthian correspondences together. Anyway, Romans is magnificent. It's beautiful. And there's a lot of important things that are in it. And, every Protestant likes Romans. It's hard not to. But Romans is complicated. And because of the tendency that we tend to have, which is to find a little passage here that makes us feel good, and a little passage over here that supports our theology, and a little passage over here, Romans tends to get kind of like picked in mind for a couple of little verses, but we have a little bit more difficult time appreciating the wider argument that Paul is saying. You would never appreciate a great movie by just watching a little clip here, a little clip here, a little clip here. No, you want to watch it from start to finish. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through Romans and slowly enough to where we can appreciate Paul's argument, but also make sense of it, because I think that there was a very significant situation that was going on in the Roman churches. And it's clear that it's not the church in Rome. When you read chapter 16, it's very clear in Romans that Paul is addressing a variety of house churches. We should start calling it the churches in Rome. That's important. That the situation that was going on there was something that Paul really needed to address. And you need to think about, why is it that the situation that was going on in Rome brought about the largest letter that Paul has ever written? That's something worth considering. So today we're going to introduce Paul's epistle to the Romans and talk about things that we need to kind of keep in mind as we approach this book. Maybe set some foundation points, and even with a teaching here on introducing something, which I hope is not going to come across as too academic. I do actually have some practical application for us to consider at the end. So a lot of stuff that I'm going to be showing you is going to be new to you. So I encourage you to just kind of block out any kind of distractions, zero in your focus. And if you got questions, we'll be happy to answer them afterwards. And we'll keep those question and answers on the tape. All right, so let's get started. Okay. Do I got a full screen right now? Full screen, thumbs up. Looks good. All right. This is a modern picture, by the way, of the ruins of the Roman Colosseum. Just a magnificent building, absolutely magnificent. Okay. All right, so we're going to be introducing Paul's epistle to the Romans. A lot of stuff to cover just for an introduction, but I think that you will find, in hindsight, what we're going to do in this session to be very, very helpful and beneficial, and perhaps you'll go back and reference this later. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the historical situations in the timeline involving Romans, okay? To make sense of Romans, you got to place it in its context. Its historical context, its political context, and its social context in the midst of Christians. So here's some important things. First thing that we need to know is that all Jews were expelled from Rome, even Jewish Christians, okay? It's really important that those Jewish Christians, the Jews that decided to be followers of Jesus, were looked upon by other people in the first century as just like every other Jew. All Christians, that they just kind of looked like Jews to other people. So we have some confirmation about the fact that Jews were were kicked out of Rome, both from within the Bible and outside of the Bible. So we learn about this in Acts 18, where it says, after these things, he, which is Paul, left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius, that's the Roman emperor, Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Okay, so we hear about that, that all the Jews were told to leave Rome. And so you can see here that Christians also had to leave Rome. And then we have from a historian, whose name is Suetonius, who wrote about the life of the 12 emperors. He wrote about the life of Claudius. He said this. He said, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of, and then we have this Latin word, Christo, he, namely the Emperor Claudius, expelled them from Rome. Okay, so we get a little bit more information from Suetonius. He tells us not only that the Jews were expelled from Rome, he also tells us that it was because of disturbances. There were instigations, and it had to do with this figure that in Latin is the word Christo. I wonder what that is. It sounds like there were disputes over Christ, over Christianity, over maybe who is the Messiah and if Jesus is the legitimate Christ. And they caused disturbances, they caused riots, they caused the disturbing of the status quo. And the Roman emperor, Claudius, said, we're not going to have people causing riots and disturbances in my Roman capital. All Jews get out. I don't care who it is. All of you get out. And so it didn't matter if you were a Jew that was a follower of Judaism or if you were a Jew that was a Christ follower. I think that sort of distinction might not have been made at this particular time, but I'm saying it just kind of for the sake of our discussion. All the Jews were kicked out of Rome. Okay. All right. So it's interesting there that it had to do with likely, if that's what this Latin word means, disturbances surrounding the person of Jesus. Okay. All right. Now, this probably took place in the year 49 AD. Okay. This is where the Jews were kicked out of Rome. Okay. Now, what's really important is that this would have shifted the ethnic dynamic of the Roman churches to being completely Gentile. Okay. So we know that churches were already there in Rome prior to Paul writing to the Romans. Okay. Paul did not found the church at Rome. Okay. Paul founded many churches, but the churches at Rome, Paul did not found. They were already there. They're pre-existing churches. Okay. So when you have churches in Rome, house churches that are believing Jews and believing Gentiles, okay, and then the Jews get expelled from Rome, guess what? The churches are just now believing Gentiles. They're not kicked out. You know, they stay. Okay. And of course they're going to stay. That's where they live. That's where they work. That's where they go to school. That's where they have property. That's where they have homes. Of course, they're not going to leave and follow these other Jews. They're going to stay there naturally. Okay. All right. Now, when Nero ascended to the role of emperor in the year 54, so that's 5 years later, okay, the edict of Claudius was rescinded. Okay, so that you know how this works. Whenever there's a new president, he gets rid of all the laws from the old president that he doesn't like. Okay, so whenever Nero ascends to the throne and becomes the emperor in 54, the edict of Claudius that had kicked the Jews out of Rome was rescinded. So naturally, the Jews are going to return. All right. So the Jews were allowed to return to Rome, regaining their homes, property, and businesses. Those Jews who were followers of Jesus would naturally return to their Roman churches, finding the local church practices to now be in routine with non-Jewish ways. I want you to think about this, okay? Prior to the Jews being kicked out, the churches in Rome would have believing Gentiles and believing Jews, okay? So they were just kind of more or less getting along in that way, okay? When the Jews get kicked out and you have Gentiles running the church for 5 years, naturally, they're not going to be focused on on issues of food laws or on keeping the Sabbath, or talking about circumcision or kosher, any of that kind of stuff there. The Gentile Christians are just doing it their own way. Okay. And so, and just think to yourself, even though 5 years is not a long time, I want you to think to yourself, how much have things changed even in our own fellowship in 5 years? What were the sort of things that we were believing and the things that we were doing in our fellowship 5 years ago that we aren't doing right now? And if someone from 5 years ago, showed up today, they would notice that there are some changes. They would notice that culturally things are a little bit different. Okay. So Paul probably wrote Romans not long after the Jews returned. So I'm going to guess probably a year after. So around 55. Okay. So it's the Jews coming back to Rome. Okay. And now being integrated in the church. And now we start to see certain hints within the book of Romans and the letter to the Romans that demonstrate that, you know what? There was not the sort of peaceful coexistence that we might hope for. That just wasn't necessarily taking place. We start to notice that the Gentiles actually are demonstrating a little bit of arrogance towards the Jews. Okay. Now, there are some reasons why this was taking place. Okay. And the reason why is that Rome, the location of Rome, was very anti-Semitic towards Jews. Okay. And it's really important for us to understand the attitude of Greco-Roman people, specifically those who lived in Rome or thought of Rome as kind of their capital or their homeland. The attitude that they had towards Jews was very, very negative. Okay. And if you don't think that had an impression, that culturally had an impression on Gentiles in the church, then you don't understand how local culture and society works. Okay. Especially when they have had the church to themselves for 5 years. Okay. So I want to take some time and I want to show people from the writings of various Greek and Latin writers in what they think about Jews. Okay. I don't think we've thought about this too much. What did the average educated Greek-speaking person or the average educated Latin-speaking person think about Jewish people in the first century? Okay. So I don't have to tell you. I could just show you from their own writings what they think. And this is important because this is going to show us why there was this uneasy coexistence once the Jews returned, and why Paul felt the need to write to the Romans. Okay. So some of these things are going to sound very harsh, but you're going to start to see how Jews were understood in their own culture. Okay. So again, this is not like in Palestine, there in Jerusalem and in Galilee. This is way out. This is in Rome. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about Roman attitudes towards Jews and Jewish practices. Tacitus is a major historian who has a lot to say about the Jewish people. This is the sort of things that he said. He said, the subject of this sentence is regarding armies who attacked the Jews in the Jewish war that led to the destruction of the Jewish temple. Those armies hated the Jews with all the hatred that is common among neighbors. Wow. He also said the Jews regard as profane all that we Romans hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. Okay. So the Jews hate all the things that we do, and all the things that we hate, the Jews permit and tolerate. Okay. We don't like the things that they do, and they don't like the things that we do. All right. The Jewish race was hateful to the gods. So he thought all the gods hated the Jews. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable and owe their persistence to their depravity. So he can acknowledge that the Jews have been around for a long time and that their practices, their rituals, and their customs have lasted a long time and actually show some evidence of actually growing in popularity in the culture. He says they're abominable and their persistence is based on their depravity. The Jews are always ready to show compassion, but towards every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. Okay, so the Jews, hey, they show compassion towards each other, but towards anyone who's non-Jewish, hate and enmity. The ways of the Jews are preposterous and ridiculous. And by ways, he means their laws, their customs, and their rituals. While the East was under the dominion of the Assyrians, Medes, and Persians, the Jews were regarded as the most despised of their subjects. Okay, so this is what a very prominent historian had to say about the Jews. Okay, Latin-speaking historian. Okay, let's look at some others. Juvenal, he was a satirist. He wrote satire. This is what he said. Okay, he said the Jews gave up every Sabbath day to laziness, keeping it apart from all concerns of life. Okay, so he's aware that you can know who a Jew is by those who rest on the seventh day, but he didn't see it as resting. He said Jews are lazy. Jews are lazy every seventh day, and that's how you can know who they are. He talks about Judea is the land where a long-established clemency allows pigs to attain a ripe old age. You know what he means by that? It's because Jews don't eat pork. So he says pigs have the greatest life living in Judea because they're never going to die. They live to a ripe old age. Okay. So that's what he talks about Judea as that particular location. Okay. He says the Jews refuse to give directions on the road to any not worshiping the same rites and directing no one except the circumcised to the desired fountain. So he says, look, even Jews, if you don't worship, the same rites, have the same rituals as them, they're not even going to tell you or answer you if you ask a question on, hey, can you show me the direction to someone? They're not even going to talk to you. Okay, they're not going to give you any direction unless you're part of the circumcised. Okay, so it's like, look, the Jews, like they don't like us, and clearly Juvenal does not like the Jews. Okay, all right, let's look at Seneca, the philosopher. There's a couple different Senecas in ancient history, but this is specifically the philosopher Seneca. He says that the customs of this accursed race have gained such influence that they are now received throughout the world. And then he comments like this. He says, the defeated ones have given their laws to the victors. The defeated ones have given their laws to the victors. Okay. So the Jews are defeated, but yet they're widely popular in proselytizing. Okay. It's an interesting admission. Okay. He says the Jews, however, are aware of the origin and meaning of their rituals. The greater part of the people go through a ritual not knowing why they do so. Okay. So the Jews are proselytizing people, and the people that are proselytized don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they believe what they believe. They don't know why they're doing what they do. And so this is kind of said in scorn, in that the Jews create mindless disciples. All right. Pliny the Elder, okay, who was a historian. He says this, a very interesting thing about rivers and streams. He says, it is an evil portent of those wishing to look at streams, find them not flowing. As recently, Larsius Licinius, who was a legate pro praetor, discovered after 7 days. In Judea is a stream that dries up on every Sabbath. He says that it's a bad omen. It's bad luck. It's a bad sign from the gods if you find a stream of water, a river that's not flowing. And he says in Judea, he says there's also a stream that basically rests on the Sabbath. That's lazy. I mean, he knows the Jewish people as the people that come from a land where even their own waters are cursed by bad omens and evil portents. And this is a guy that's a historian. This is what he's saying. All right. Petronius, a lesser known guy. He has a very, very interesting commentary. I want you to see what he says. He's talking about a slave that he purchased. He says a certain slave has only two faults. And if he were rid of them, he would be simply perfect. What are his two faults? He is circumcised and he snores. For I do not mind his being cross-eyed. He has the look like Venus. So that is why he cannot keep silent and scarcely ever shuts his eyes. I bought him for 300 denarii. Okay. So he goes to buy a slave and he says, this slave would be absolutely perfect if he didn't snore and if he wasn't circumcised. Notice that being circumcised is something that removes you from perfection in the eyes of this Roman. Okay. Now, granted, he's writing that in his satire, but I do think he's talking about an actual slave that he purchased. Okay. He also says that the Jew might worship his pig god and appeal in the ears of high heaven, but unless, probably should say unless he also cuts back his foreskin with a knife, he shall go forth from his people and immigrate to Greek cities, and he must not tremble at the fast of Sabbath that are imposed by the law. Okay. I've wondered here why he understands the Jewish God as a pig god. Obviously, you wouldn't get that from any sort of images because Jews don't have images, but perhaps it's because the Jews don't eat pig. They don't eat pork. Maybe they revere that animal because supposedly that's their God. That's the understanding that he is bringing. That's probably why he's coming to that conclusion. But obviously it's not a neutral thing to say. But he does point out that, look, they're circumcised. And if you don't do this, then you have to leave and you have to go and live in Greek cities. And you have to honor the Sabbaths, and that's imposed by their law. So he's talking about what makes people look like Jews. Okay. They're circumcised, they worship a single God, and they obey the Sabbath. Okay. Apollonius Molon, whose writings we only have preserved by the things that Josephus says. So I'm not putting this in quotation because Josephus is telling us what this Apollonius guy said. So Josephus says that while he, Apollonius, sometimes reproaches us, and Josephus is a Jew, as atheists and man-haters, and sometimes hits us in the teeth with our want of courage, and yet sometimes, on the contrary, accuses us of too great boldness and madness in our conduct. Nay, he says that we are the weakest of all the barbarians, and that this is the reason why we are the only people who have made no improvements in human life. Okay, so we have Gentiles saying that Jews are barbarians and that they are weak, they are mad, they have too much boldness sometimes, and that's why they don't make any improvements in life. Okay, they also are accused of atheists because the Jews don't have any idols, so maybe they don't worship any gods. And of course, you see another comment here that they hate men. The Jews hate other people. All right. He also says that Josephus is talking about Apollonius, he made it one branch of his accusation against us Jews, that we do not admit such as have different notions about God, nor will we have fellowship with those who choose to observe a way of living different from ourselves. Okay. This is, of course, a true accusation. Okay. The Jews, don't want to have any association with people who believe differently about God, and they don't want to have fellowship with people who have a different way of life. Okay, because the law of Moses is a way of life for the Jews. Can't remember how many of these. I probably spent the majority of my research for this digging up all of these quotes because I really want you to get a rich and vivid feel for the anti-Semitic and the hatred that Romans, both Greek speaking and Latin speaking, had towards Jewish people. Diodorus. He said that they alone of all nations, let's talk about the Jews, avoided dealing with any other people and looked upon all men as their enemies. He also said that the ancestors of the Jews had been driven out of all Egypt as men who were impious and detested by all gods. Okay, so the gods hate the Jews. He also said that the Jews had made their hatred of mankind into a tradition, and on account had introduced utterly outlandish laws, not to break bread with any other race, nor to show them any goodwill. So again, we see that we don't like the Jews and the Jews don't like us. The gods don't like the Jews and Jews don't like the other gods. Okay. They hate us. We hate them. Okay. All right. So hopefully that gives you an impression. Okay. And again, I want you to think to yourself. Okay. The Jewish Christians were expelled from Rome. That left the Roman churches to be all Gentile. In their society, they are told to hate Jews. They are said, look, we don't like Jews. We don't like their Jewish customs. The Jews, they don't like us. We don't like them. We don't like us. They've been kicked out of Rome. Good riddance, okay? Maybe these Jewish Christians in Rome knew of some of the teachings of Jesus, where Jesus, in the Olivet Discourse, predicted that the Jewish temple was going to be destroyed. Okay, so maybe they would say, well, look, God's going to have their temple destroyed. They're already being kicked out of Rome. Everywhere they go, they cause disturbances and riots. Good riddance, I mean, you can understand that some of the Gentile Christians in Rome would be happy to see the Jews gone and maybe not so happy to see them return because their society hates Jews. And the perception is that Jews don't like anyone else. It's very, very difficult to have a peaceful coexistence in the first century of churches with Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. Okay, so let's talk about the historical situations prompting the writing of the Epistle to the Romans. Okay, so this is where we're going to look inside Romans itself and see reasons that Paul gives for why he is writing this. And so I'm going to give you the three big ones. Okay, these are very, very important. Very important. Okay. All right. So first thing is that we see that Paul wants to evangelize Spain, and he would like to use Rome as a home base. All right. So this is what Paul says in chapter 15, starting in verse 17. Paul says, therefore, in Christ Jesus, I have found reason for boasting in things pertaining to God, for I will not presume to speak of anything except what Christ has accomplished through me, resulting in the obedience of the Gentiles by word and deed, in the power of signs and wonders, in the power of the Spirit. Why? So that from Jerusalem and round about as far as Illyricum, I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. And thus, I aspired to preach the gospel not where Christ was already named, so that I would not build on another man's foundation. But as it is written, they who had no news of him shall see, and they who have not heard shall understand. For this reason, I've often been prevented from coming to you, Romans. But now, with no further place for me in these regions, and since I had for many years a longing to come to you whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing and to be helped along my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while, but now I'm going to Jerusalem serving the saints. Okay, so what we get from that passage is that Paul he feels that he has preached the gospel in all of these regions that he's been in, basically what they're going to call the East. Okay, so like in Macedonia, in Greece, obviously Jerusalem, obviously over in Asia Minor, Ephesus, all that area. And so Paul now wants to move to places to where the gospel hasn't been preached. Paul wants to ultimately go over to Spain. And from the perspective of Paul, Spain is the farthest west that the world is. Like no one has been farther than Spain because you get to the ocean and no one's gone any farther. Okay. But Paul is saying, look, first, I got to go to Jerusalem. I got to go to Jerusalem. I have to serve the saints. And this is what we see in the book of Acts, to where Paul goes to Jerusalem, and we see that he gets arrested, and he has his trial with Felix, and he appeals to Caesar, and then he's in imprisonment, and he goes to Rome. And eventually in Rome, I imagine he gets to meet these people, but we don't get any indication from the book of Acts that Paul actually ever made it out to Spain. And that's a really important point that I want you just to be thinking about here. Okay. But in order to kind of see this, it's really good to kind of point this out on a map. Now, I am sure that you are all experts on first century Roman geography. So this is all going to be a review for you. Okay. But just in case you're like me and you struggle with some of this stuff, let's just kind of put this map up a little bit here. And let me actually, we'll do some drawing. Let's use a pen. Okay. All right. So you can see right here, here's Rome, put a little circle here, and you can see Spain. All right. Way over here, we've got Judea, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. Okay. And here in the middle, Macedonia, Greece. Okay. So that's where we have like Thessalonica. That's where we have Corinth. We got Asia Minor here. Way up here in the top of Asia Minor, we have what would be Galatia. Kind of right over here on the edge is where we're going to have Ephesus. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing those things up there. So you could see kind of like if you just draw a line right through the middle. Okay, you could see that on the east are all the places to where there are already churches. Okay, Rome's got churches, Macedonia's churches, Greece has churches, Ephesus, Galatia, obviously churches in Jerusalem. Okay, the Judean churches. Okay, so all that stuff's there, okay? And Paul is saying, hey, I want to go out there to Spain. Look at all that area that has not yet been evangelized, all that area that there are no churches, okay? So Paul says, in order for me to do this, I want to use Rome. Let's draw an arrow here. I'm going to use Rome as a home base, So Paul can kind of use Rome as a home base as a springboard for him to go over here to Spain. Okay. So what Paul says there in Romans 15, he's like, look, I want to go to you and I want to be helped along my way. You know what that means? It means I want you to donate to my missionary fund as I go and I evangelize. Okay. But Paul is being really careful about using the word money there, but obviously he has good intentions for that. But he's saying, look, before I can do that, before I can even come to Rome and use it as a springboard to go over to Spain, I have to go to Jerusalem because Paul has been collecting this fund for a long time, from the churches. You can read about this in Romans and in 1 Corinthians and in 2 Corinthians. You can read about it in Galatians, I think also in Philippians, where Paul talks about it. He's been going around collecting this money, this fund, because there's this famine in Jerusalem. Okay. And but the key thing is that we have no indication that Paul has ever made it to Spain. Okay, but you can see this is why one of the reasons why Paul is writing to the Romans is because he wants to use Rome as a springboard to do that. And to do that, he's got to introduce himself. They don't know him. They've never seen him. Paul didn't found the churches in Rome. Anyway, so it's kind of nice to kind of put that. And again, I'm sure all of you already knew all that stuff right there, but for me, I need to kind of see that. You're all very smart and intelligent. So that just kind of helps me get things situated. Okay, second reason from Romans. Paul needs to de-escalate local Gentile Christian arrogance regarding Jews, okay? Remember, we just saw all of this evidence to where Greek-speaking and Latin-speaking Romans hated Jews. They despised Jews. They were anti-Semitic. And it's clear, based on what we see in Romans, that many of the Gentiles in the church had a very negative attitude towards the Jews. And Paul needed to de-escalate that. Okay, you can understand that. So look at what he says here. This is actually a really powerful statement in chapter 11. So Paul says, but I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles. Okay, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, if somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen, that's the Jews, to save some of them. For if their, the Jewish rejection, is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Okay. If the first piece of dough is holy, then the lump also, namely, if the initial, the Jews, if they're holy, then the lump also. If the root is holy, the Jewish root, then the branches are also. Okay. But if some of the branches were broken off, some of the Jewish branches were broken off, and you, Gentiles, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and became partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree. Do not be arrogant towards the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. And Paul agrees. Quite right. If they were broken off for their lack of faithfulness, but you stand in your faithfulness. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. That's a very, very powerful thing that Paul is saying there. But you can see it's very clear in that passage that the Gentiles there are saying, look, these Jews, they've rejected their own Messiah. God has rejected them. And there's this arrogance towards them. He says, what's the word that he uses there? Do not be arrogant towards the branches, you Gentiles in the church. Don't be arrogant towards those Jews, especially those in your own church. Because look, if God broke off the Jews because of their lack of faithfulness, God won't spare you either. Okay. And so Paul needed to write this letter, which talks about how Jews and Gentiles are one and the same in the gospel. Okay. That both Jews and Gentiles are one in Christ. It's not the Gentiles are not better than the Jews, even though many of the Jews, and Paul admits this, have rejected their own Messiah. And thereby they've rejected what God is doing in history. Third part from Romans that tells us, Paul wants to encourage mutual acceptance among believing Jews and Gentiles, okay? Because when you have Jews who accept Jesus, their natural inclination is that, hey, we're going to continue to keep the Sabbath because that's what we've done our entire life. We're going to continue to keep kosher because that's what we've done our entire life, okay? Obviously, we've been circumcised, okay? We're going to continue to honor that because it's what we've done as an identity. But when you've got Jewish Christians who are used to doing those things in a church with Gentile Christians who are not used to doing those things and who look down upon all three of those practices, Paul has to encourage mutual acceptance between Jews and Gentiles, believing Jews and Gentiles. Okay? Here's what Paul says, chapter 15, verse 7. He says, therefore, accept one another, just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. For I say that Christ became a servant to the circumcision on behalf of the truth of God to confirm the promises given to the fathers and for the Gentiles to glory God for his mercy, As it is written, now he's going to quote a bunch of passages about Gentiles praising the Jewish God. Therefore, I will give praise to you among the Gentiles. Okay. I will sing your name. Again, he says, rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people. And again, praise the Lord, all you Gentiles, and let all the peoples praise him. And Isaiah says, there shall come the root of Jesse, and he who arises to rule over the Gentiles. In him shall the Gentiles hope. Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that you will abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Okay? It's interesting. If you look at those passages, therefore, I don't know the passage off the top of my head, but I think this is in the Psalms. The psalmist, okay, the Israelite psalmist, will give praise to you, Yahweh, among the Gentiles. Okay, he's looking forward to a time to where Israelites are worshiping together with Gentiles. And I will sing your name. Again, rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people. Okay, with the Jewish people, Gentiles together worshiping with Jews. Okay. All right. Praise the Lord, all you Gentiles, and let all the peoples praise him. Again, Gentiles and all the peoples praising Yahweh together. And then this last quote is very interesting. Okay. There's going to be the root of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. So the descendant of David, the descendant of Jesse, who's going to arise and rule over the Gentiles. And in him, in the root of Jesse, shall the Gentiles hope. Now, I don't think Paul was unaware of the fact that in Rome, the Gentiles don't worship the Jewish Messiah. In Rome, the Gentiles worship Caesar. The Gentiles worship the emperor. So this is a very specific thing that he's saying here to really make this point that the Gentiles are going to be placing their hope in a Jewish king, in a Jewish Messiah, and that would have some very significant counter-imperial claims. It would be seditious. And there's a lot of things that Paul's going to say in Romans that are going to be deliberately seditious against the Emperor Nero, against the Roman Empire, and against the wider imperial propaganda. So that sort of stuff that we have been encouraged to look at in the book of Revelation is going to be all over Romans. I mean, Paul is writing to Rome. He's writing to, whether they lived in Italy, we're not sure. But if he's writing to the Roman Catholic, he's writing there where like the strongest patriotism towards the Roman Empire is present. And so he's going to make claims about Jesus that are going to undercut the claims of the power of Caesar and the Roman Empire. Anyway, but the point there is that, hey, we need to accept one another because the Bible predicts that believing Jews and Gentiles are going to be worshiping the same God. And he said, this is what should be happening in the church. Okay. Let's talk a little bit further. Okay, so let's talk about some of the major themes in Romans that are worth considering. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on these as we approach them in the text. We're going to spend a lot more time unpacking them because these particular themes, and there's probably more than the three I'm going to show here, are extremely important for the argument of Romans and the theology of Romans. They are extremely, extremely important. However, and you should be aware of this, various church traditions, various denominations, and various theologies have taken hold of these definitions and changed them to fit their own theology. Okay? And so there's naturally going to be some debate on all of the topics that I'm going to show you on this particular passage, or on this slide. So we're going to take time, not today, but we're going to take some time throughout the series to show what Paul meant by these passages. So the first one is going to be the righteousness of God. The righteousness of God. And what I think Paul means by this is that it's God's own righteousness. It's God's righteousness, okay? God's own responsibility on his end with the covenant. It's God's faithfulness to the promises that he made, and it's his role as the bringer of justice, namely in the way that a judge would bring justice in a law court setting. That's what God's righteousness entails. Okay, so when we see this phrase, the righteousness of God, which is going to be a major, major theme in Romans in ways that we haven't seen it in other letters, we're going to need to make sure that we understand what this means. The righteousness of God is not the righteousness that God gives to other people. It's God's own righteousness that belongs to him and describes him. Okay, I'm making that distinction very carefully. All right. Next one. The faithfulness of Jesus, the faithfulness of Jesus. And I think that this phrase in Romans portrays Jesus as a faithful human Messiah who is obedient and loyal to God's plans and purposes. And as a faithful Jew, Jesus Christ fulfilled the vocation of the Jewish people. That's a lot of what Romans is going to say about God's plans for the Jewish people and how Jesus has fulfilled that and how the Gentiles are sharing in the benefits of what Christ has accomplished. Okay. We're going to see this phrase, and maybe your translation will say it, the faith of Jesus. Okay. And I think that this is referring to the faithfulness that Jesus himself possessed and demonstrated in the loyalty that Jesus had to God, the faithfulness that Jesus had to God. Okay? This is not taking away from the fact that we need to have faith in Jesus. That is true. But I think there's a very specific phrase in Romans that deals with Jesus and his own faithfulness to God, his own loyalty to God, his own obedient actions that he had to God. And it makes Jesus an example figure. Okay. All right. And then justification. Okay. My goodness. The amount of ridiculous things that are said to define justification in the Christian church are just, it's astonishing. Okay. And here's the thing. If what I'm going to show you here is new, I'm not looking down on you. I'm not blaming you for that. Okay. It's a tricky, complicated subject, and people that haven't taken the time to define justification based on what it says in the Old Testament, okay, and how it's used very specifically in Paul's writings, will not have a good understanding of what it means. Okay, so if you've inherited a misunderstood understanding of justification, it's okay, that's fine, but let's work to try to improve that. Okay, so when it comes to justification, which is a major theme in Romans, I'm going to be very, very specific as to what it means. It means a lot, actually, as we're going to see here. So, justification is the act of the judge, namely God, to declare that someone is right. Okay, it's not making somebody right; it's declaring that someone is right. Okay. You are innocent. You are in the right. You are not guilty. Okay? Now, justification, you need to think about this, justification is thereby linked with judgment. And we know that judgment is going to happen on the last day. Okay? We know that on the last day is the day of judgment. That's a common way, it's a common term to describe the last day, the day when the kingdom comes, when Jesus returns. It's called the day of judgment, okay? So since justification deals with God deciding and declaring whether someone is right or guilty, then justification naturally has to do with judgment. You need to make that connection in your mind. Justification has to deal with judgment, okay? Now, here's what's interesting. The justified verdict that is going to be issued on the last day has been brought forward into the present by declaring a repentant sinner as right in terms of God's covenant relationship, thereby making the new believer a member of the new covenant. Okay? And what I mean by this is that we see that justification, namely judgment on the last day, is a future justification, like someone will be justified in the future. And yet Paul will also be able to talk about how the fact that we have been justified. Now, why is it that Paul can say that we have been justified already by becoming a Christian, being declared right in the terms of God's covenant, and that this is a judgment type word? And I think the reason for this is the thing that we've seen throughout the recent teachings, which is this already and not yet of the kingdom. Already and not yet, okay? In the future, God, as a judge, is going to set everything right. He's going to fix all the problems. The people that have been wronged, they're going to be vindicated. People that have died, they're going to be raised back to life. The people that are evil and guilty and sinful, they're going to be dealt with, okay? They're going to be declared guilty, okay? We, of course, hope that we're going to get on that day of judgment the declaration that we are right, that we are innocent, that we are God's people, okay? That future justification has been brought into the present when we become Christians, okay? We are declared right. We are declared justified. And we are now we're now in the covenant. We are now members of God's covenant relationship. Okay. So it's a little complex. You can see there's a lot of things that are going on here. And we'll spend some more time talking about this as we go through the passages, and we'll show how this works in the Old Testament and how this works in Romans. And if you want to, by the way, you can go back and you can look at our series on Galatians, to where I talk about this because the theology that Paul has on this is already apparent in Galatians, but it's much, much more prevalent in Romans, okay? So look, I understand. Look at all three of these things. Righteousness of God, That's a big, complex, loaded term. Faithfulness of Jesus, that's an even debated term as to how it should be translated. And then justification, you could see it, even though I'm only putting 3 bullet points, there's a lot that's packed in there. I get it. I understand. You may still have questions. We'll get to those in time. Okay. We don't have to settle that today. Okay. But these are some things, some major themes that we should start to consider. All right. I think I got 3 more slides. Okay. Here's some tips for studying Romans seriously. Okay. These are some things that I would suggest you after having taught this now for, gosh, I don't know, maybe 20 years. Some things that will help you to get the most out of studying Romans. Okay. First thing that I think is the most important thing is that you have to stick to a modern literal translation. Okay. Preferably the NASB or the New Revised Standard Version. Okay. The NIV is god awful with Romans. It is so bad. It is not good because the translators, I'm just saying, just particularly for Romans, it is just really, really bad because it's going to take a lot of those terms and it's going to interpret them by a very specific Reformed tradition that doesn't actually make sense of what Paul is saying. You're going to get into like chapter 3, and you're not going to understand anything Paul is saying because they're trying to load in their own theology into the text. And the NIV has been deeply criticized by many scholars as not accurately portraying what the text is saying. And the King James, it's beautiful, but it's old. It's old, and it needs to be abandoned for serious Bible study. Trust me when I tell you this, from having taken a long time to translate this, the NASB and the New Revised Standard Version are, I think, the two of the most accurate translations when it comes to Romans. Okay, a lot of the problems of interpreting Romans come by translations that push their own theology into the text. Okay, so again, we'll talk about it when we get to some of the passages. But again, I'm just strongly going to encourage you, even if you don't typically use the NASB or the New Revised Standard Version, I would encourage you to use either of those when we're studying Romans. Of course, you can use whatever you want, okay? But you're going to run into some problems. All right. The second thing, really important, we need to allow Paul to make his own argument rather than making Paul say what we and our cherished traditions want him to say. I'm going to say that again. Allow Paul to make his own argument. Let Paul speak. Let the man talk. Okay? We have to be very, very careful about interpreting what he says based on our own traditions or based on what we want him to say. Let Paul speak. Give him room to talk. Okay? Number 3, if Paul raises a question and doesn't immediately answer it, don't feel the urge to offer an answer that he has not explicitly given to the reader. Let him unpack his argument in his own timing. We're going to see this in Romans. Paul is going to raise some questions, and he's not going to answer it for a few chapters. Okay? Paul raises those questions to raise some tension, to get you thinking as the reader, and then Paul is going to answer them later. But if he doesn't answer immediately, don't go to try to answer those questions. Paul's not giving you the answer. Don't answer the question that Paul hasn't given you the answer to. Okay? So we have to be very, very careful. I'm just telling you, you're going to read through Romans and you're going to see Paul raising questions that he doesn't immediately answer, but he answers a little bit later. Okay? Let Paul answer his own questions in his own timing. Just we got to be patient. All right? Number 4. And this is just a suggestion for people that maybe like to journal. In order to see if you are following the argument that Paul is making, write out a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the section. And keep these summaries in a flow chart to see how the overall argument is unfolding. I think that's a good thing. I think after every teaching on Romans that we do, if right after you can go and write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the first 5 verses of Romans. Okay. And then just have that there. Okay. That's the summary of this section. And so that way I can remember this section by this summary or a couple of bullet points. And then we got the next section. Then we got the next section. Then we got the next section. That will help you to see how the argument of Romans unfolds. It unpacks. how Paul's looking forward to future things. You can look back at the end. You can say, oh, this right here is where Paul answers the questions that he raised back here. Okay. Find good ways. It helps you to see if you really understand what Paul is saying. If you can summarize a section of Romans in 1 to 2 sentences, then it shows that you grasp and comprehend what he's saying. All right. Now, we also need to continually consider how the words of Paul would serve to encourage a peaceful coexistence of Roman churches consisting of believing Jews and believing Gentiles, okay? We know the church has an uneasy coexistence. We know they probably don't get along, okay? So think to yourself as you're reading, how would the words that Paul are writing here, how would they encourage believing Jews and believing Gentiles to get along in this church? That's a major thing that Paul needs to fix. And Paul needs them to, Paul's got to win them over, but they got to win each other over and they got to accept each other. So Paul can presumably go over to Rome and get ready to go to Spain. And lastly, also consider how the original recipients who lived in a highly political and imperial location would have heard how Paul makes claims about Jesus that undermine the wider propaganda of Caesar Nero. Okay, we have to think, okay, how is what Paul is saying here, how would that have been understood by people who are told they need to be patriotic and loyal to Rome, the Roman Empire, and to Caesar? Okay, because Paul is going to make a lot of counter-imperial claims in Romans, a lot of them. Okay, 2 slides to go. Romans is as a somewhat extended Galatians, okay? And this is something that I think might help you to get into Romans, is to start with Galatians. So Paul's earlier letter to the Galatians dealt with many of the same themes that we encounter in Romans. In Galatia, the issue was that Jewish Christians were seen as superior to non-Jewish believers, forcing Paul to remind the readers that covenant membership is not based on doing works of the Jewish law, but rather on faithfulness. Now, Romans deals with the flipped problem. Now, believing Gentiles think that they are better than believing Jews. So you see how that's a flip problem? In Galatians, it's the Jewish Christians were thought that they were superior to the non-Jewish Christians, to the Gentile Christians. In Romans, it's the Gentile Christians who think that they're better than Jewish Christians. So you're going to see a similar argument to try to bring peace in Galatians and Romans. So when Paul speaks of those who gave to his missionary fund, the churches in Galatia are not mentioned. When Paul recounts who actually donated to him, the churches in Galatia are not mentioned. And this, combined with with these somewhat harsh statements that are made in Galatians, perhaps, just my guess, perhaps suggest that Paul didn't persuade the Galatians with his arguments. Paul wanted the Galatians to give to him. They didn't. Paul made some really harsh statements in Galatians. Paul says, look, those that want to get circumcised, I hope that the knife slips and you get castrated. That's, that might not be a very nice, gentle, Christ-like thing to say, you might think. Okay, I mean, Paul made some pretty harsh statements there in Galatians. All right, so therefore, we should not be surprised if Paul offers a similar argument in Romans to that which we observed in Galatians, while, and I underline this, taking more time to make his points and unpack his arguments. And this perhaps explains why Romans is 16 chapters long compared to the 6 chapters of Galatians. Paul might have rushed things in Galatians. He might not have been persuasive in his arguments. We do know for a fact that they didn't donate to him. Okay, so maybe Paul, when he's addressing a similar circumstance to where one group in the church thinks they're better than the other group, Paul needs more time. So instead of 6 chapters, he now has 16 chapters. So we're going to see similar themes that we've seen in Galatians, but Paul is going to spend more time. He's going to unpack them. He's going to be more detailed in his argumentation. Okay. He's not going to be as harsh in his tone. He's not going to say, like in Galatians 3:1, you foolish Galatians. He's not going to say that. He's going to be much more tactful in how he makes his argument. So the point is, a good way to get into Romans is to go back and to read Galatians first. Something to consider. And again, we have a whole teaching series on Galatians where I go through line by line and we talk about a lot of these points. Okay. All right, let's talk about application. I understand this is all introduction. We haven't spent a lot of time in Romans, but what is a really interesting point that I think you can walk away with today? And I think there's a really interesting pastoral point that comes out of Romans that I don't think a lot of people have appreciated. Paul wrote the epistle to the Romans, admittedly, with a desire to use the Roman churches as a home base to begin evangelizing Spain. Based on all available evidence and the narrative of the book of Acts, Paul never made it out of his Roman imprisonment so that he could travel to Spain. It is reasonable to conclude that if Paul had never desired to obey the Great Commission and preach the gospel of the kingdom to those in Spain, he would not have written the epistle to the Romans. I'll say that again. It is reasonable to conclude that if Paul had never desired to obey the Great Commission and preach the gospel of the kingdom to those in Spain, he would not have written Romans. Sometimes our desires to do great things for God do not pan out as we expected. Since God was able to use the desire of Paul in order to produce the monumental literary boon for the service of the church, it goes to show that God can do the same for you and me. The growth and fruit that we produce in our obedient walk should not be overshadowed by where we want to go in life and what we want to do for God. We should be more mindful of the journey and the maturing we experience along the way, especially if things don't turn out how we planned. So I'm making the suggestion there that Paul wrote Romans, at least partially, because he wanted to go to Spain. Paul never made it to Spain, but that God-given desire in his heart to go evangelize to Spain, even though it never came to fruition, brought us the book of Romans. Things might not work out in our life the way that we want it to, okay? But we should not overlook what we have produced and how we've matured in our faithful walk with Christ along the way. Don't miss out on that, because even though Paul didn't go to Spain, we got the book of Romans out of it. That's a pretty big deal. Okay, that's all I have for an introduction. Hopefully that's enough to kind of to get you going. Let me stop sharing my screen and let's open some things up for questions, comments, and reflections. Okay, I'm going to go to Paul and then Donna.
Let me just unmute first. Thanks for that teaching, Dustin. I think that was really good introduction there. Yeah, I didn't quite appreciate how much disliked the Jewish race were in Rome. So I did do a study of Romans, like you said, with the summarizing the next 5 verses and so on, and going through, and I did that quite painstakingly over quite a couple of months, not getting as much time as I want to, and having to mull over some verses for days on end, just days and days, just thinking about what does it really mean? What does he mean by that? And praying to God for clarification on that. So it was really hard work. I wish I had realized that Galatians was would have been a better introduction to understanding Romans, but I did make it through and I got a lot out of it. So what you suggest there, I really would recommend to anyone and everyone. You know, if you read it, don't waste your time just reading it. Also really take it in. Don't skim over things that you don't really understand, or you think you understand, just weigh them up in your mind as you go along, and watch out for chapters that end in an unusual place, and chapters that don't seem to start in the right place because they actually start earlier, and so on. There's so much just to pick up from that. But I really appreciate that. I mean, when I'd studied Romans without knowing that background that you gave about the multiple churches, I really did think it was just one church there with a mixture of Jews and Gentiles in it, and that there were differences between them, and possibly even that some Gentiles would think that, surely it's not just by faith, surely we must not eat pig meat and things like this. So I saw it more as that way. But the fact that there's multiple churches in people's homes, I didn't really quite fully keep that in mind, but I did see it as there being differences in how people understood what they had to do. And I could obviously go into a bit more about Romans, but I won't. I think you've got plenty to talk about in the next while. It really is packed with so much goodness. What I might actually do, Dustin, is I might share a PDF with you after this, just what I pulled out of it, just in case there is anything because I actually went down to the Greek for a lot of things, because there was even, and I was using NRSV, but I did go down to the Greek in most verses actually, because I'm just so distrusting of translations, which is a sad state of affairs. But and I got a lot out of that, but it did make the journey a bit slow. So yeah, thank you again for that, Dustin.
Yeah.
I think that was great. Thank you.
I appreciate your thoughts there, and maybe you have some insight on the text that I haven't seen. So I'll look forward to what you have to share with me, and what you have to share throughout this journey. So
yeah, thank you.
For that.
Hopefully nothing too controversial. If there is, then I probably haven't understood it. But I'll let you be the judge of
that. There's a lot controversial in Romans. I don't think probably within the midst of our community right now, and kind of where we are in our beliefs, I don't think we're going to find anything too controversial for us. But there's a lot of controversial interpretations in the wider Christian world, even among biblical Unitarians. So, but yeah.
What I tried to do when I went through it was just to let Romans explain Romans and nothing else. Don't refer to other parts. It's hard to put aside, obviously, what Jesus taught and the Sermon on the Mount and so on. Can't really get away from that. But if you try to put everything else aside when you read it and just read it with new eyes, it's really an interesting and interesting journey. But thank you for that, and I look forward to the rest of the teaching.
Donna?
Put my hand down here. Yeah, I really appreciate what Paul had to say too about seeing Romans with new eyes, and lots of chatter in my brain as to some of the things that I was taught. However, I'm not going to waste time, because it's the same old trash people trying to name it and claim it, and miss the boat because they don't understand the historical background of the Apostle Paul, nor do they understand the emperor worship. So they try to make it their own, and it turns out to be a mess. And especially the righteousness of Jesus and the faith of Christ, and it's all in that name it and claim it prosperity gospel, where they try to apply something that is not applicable to themselves, because they're unfortunately not taught correctly from the basis of the historical understanding. You can't even touch it. However, Romans chapter 1, I can't even touch that thing. There's a lot I've been taught, but I don't want to go there right now. I really loved the way you wrap this up about the Apostle Paul, and wanted to go to Spain, and he would have never wrote Romans, and things not turning out the way that he really desired, and God worked. Boy, that spoke to my heart so big, because we can get very garbled in our how come this and Lord that, and I started out this way and I wanted that and it didn't start there, and I go there, I'm like, I want to go to the prisons and teach all the women, and how come you're not working, God, and blah blah and blah blah, because I have a passion to work with people who don't know Christ. And so, feeling very limited, but you can't appreciate the Lord and your relationship if you're always squawking. I'm speaking of myself here, but I'm sure I'm not alone. When you're always kind of missing the boat in your expectation of what the Lord is doing. So I loved the way you wrapped it up in a beautiful, to me, it's a gift and a bow. To say what you said in the end really spoke to my inner heart. So I appreciate that, Dustin.
Yeah, some people might find that controversial, that we got the book of Romans out of a goal that Paul had in his heart that never actually came to fruition. Some people might take offense to that. But I think that actually has a really, if it's true, I think that gives a God-inspired way of looking at disappointment, in a very real way. So it's a very mature position to come to. So I'm glad that it spoke to you. I hope it speaks to other people as well. I think it's a big deal. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Dean.
Donna shared exactly what I was going to share about our plans for things that we want to do for God. Sometimes it doesn't come the way we think it's going to come. And what came to mind when you were saying that at the last was David wanting to build a temple for God. And God said, no, you can't do that. It was in David's heart to build that, but it's going to be for your son to do that. We often have plans that we want to do. I know I certainly have plans and things that I wanted to see come to pass, but I'm not God. I'm not the Lord Jesus Christ. They have to direct me. And we'll see how things work out as God is going to look at our faithfulness, and it's his plans for doing, Paul was given the revelation that John was supposed to write, but Paul wasn't supposed to write that revelation. It was for John to write that. The other thing is I'm thinking, did Paul mature more? This is a question. When he first wrote, I know Romans was one of the last books he wrote, last letters, but did he learn more? Obviously he was growing in understanding as he was walking with God in Christ, like everybody should be.
Yeah.
They don't know it all beginning. It's a gradual learning as we walk with the Lord and as we walk with our Father, and as we learn from each other. Did he learn more? Did he become more mature, more understanding about situations when he wrote about Romans? That's a question to you. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's natural that if you're in full-time ministry for as long as Paul was, not over 15, 20 years, you have a long time to reflect on things. I know for me that there are times when I've taught something to somebody and I thought that I was accurately conveying what I wanted to convey. And I talked to people afterwards and they didn't get out of it what I said. And the way I think about that now is that, okay, if people are not getting out of it what I want them to say, then I'm not conveying it correctly. I don't immediately think, well, it's the other person who's not listening, or they're not, they just don't know enough. I think, okay, what can I do to be clearer? What can I do to unpack things? What roadblocks do I need to remove in order for this to make a little bit more sense? There's definitely a sense, especially like in Romans 9 through 11, which is going to be the climax of the entire book, where Paul has some really, really deep reflections on the fact that Jews were given the promises of God, and yet most of the Jews aren't accepting the Messiah. And that's a reflection that Paul has after a long ministry of preaching the Jews. He's not going to have, he's going to have that inclination very early on, because he knows that he himself was one of those persons. But that is something that Paul's going to give a much more deeper unpacking on in chapters 9, 10, and 11 to deal with it. You won't see in some of the early letters. Like I said, I think in Galatians, where Paul thought that he was persuasive in what he said, we're going to see in Romans that Paul's going to spend 2 to 3 times the time explaining and unpacking things, because he needs that time. He needs to be able to make sure he's absolutely clear. Maybe he's learned that this is something that needs more time and attention, because it hasn't been as successful in the past as he would have liked it to have been. So I think it's only natural that we grow and we learn as we move on. I don't think that there's not going to be any like new doctrines or anything in Romans that we don't already see. I think it's one of those things that you might reflect on as we continue to go through Romans. Because you're going to see Paul saying things there that, okay, I recognize that from 1st and 2nd Corinthians. All those, by the way, came before Romans. I see that in 1st Thessalonians that came before Romans. I see that in Galatians that came before Romans. So really all the letters that we spend a lot of time on were before Romans. So Romans is going to be kind of a product of all of that thinking and reflection.
Well, this is a book that I always wanted to understand. And my last question is, when are you going to teach on this next? Do you know?
I have two slots in December. So one, I'll start off Romans, and then another teaching in December. I'm going to talk about the birth of Jesus, because you kind of talk about that in December. So
okay,
yeah. So I'll do one break, and then from then on out, it'll be nothing but Romans, unless I feel moved to do something else. So,
all right, thanks.
Yeah, please look forward to it. The Triggs are raising one single hand. Maybe there's 8 hands. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I wanted to also chime in and just say the same thing as everybody else on the regards to the application that you pulled out of things. I can affirm that because I actually had my own personal experience with that sort of thing happening in a short duration, where I felt very, very strongly about something that needed to happen and communicated that to another person, because they had to be involved in that taking place if it were going to happen. And then interestingly, it wasn't the thing that I thought needed to happen that ended up happening. It was something else that resulted that in hindsight needed to happen. And it was that sense of strong conviction that this other thing needed to happen, that chain reacted and triggered the thing that did happen, that in hindsight needed to happen. So that's nondescript, but you get the point that sometimes God obviously works in us in ways where we can feel very strongly that some sort of thing needs to be accomplished, but then it's in us taking action on that conviction that what he actually wants done happens. So it's really cool, and it's totally, I agree with that idea completely. And for that reason, I would probably posit that it is true. Your perspective on that, Dustin. Also, I don't want to cut any further discussion off, but I discovered this morning, Sean did send me a message that, and some of you maybe have heard, I'm sure Paul's aware of the winter storm situation in the UK. So Sean and Sarah's recovering from COVID. I think she's on the up and up now. Sean hasn't caught it, but their house has been without power for 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Because the weather is so bad there right now. And his symptoms actually get triggered when he gets cold too. So had no heat. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. If we're going to go into a time of prayer, that we should pray for them further, because it's a when it rains, it pours kind of situation for them the last couple of weeks. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there before we finish up here today.
Yeah, I'll cut off the recording for that when we get to there. Okay. Donna, do you still have your hand raised, or is this a new question? Okay. All right. And make sure I didn't leave anything out of the chat. Okay. Well, good deal. Anyone else have anything they wanted to say?
Yeah, I had my hand raised because I'm confused. Did you say that Paul didn't go to Rome and he wrote these letters later on upon reflect? I mean, can you?
So, okay. Yeah. Let's make sure that we're clear on this. Okay. We Paul made it to Rome.
Okay.
Because of his Roman imprisonment. Okay. So we know that in Acts,
that's right. Yeah.
we know that he went down to Jerusalem. He was arrested. He had various trials under these procurators, Felix and Festus. He appealed to Rome. He was taken by ship. He had shipwreck and ultimately made it to Rome in Acts 28. And the book of Acts ends in Roman imprisonment, where Paul is preaching the gospel, the kingdom, and the name of Jesus Christ, unhindered, even though he's under, he's still imprisoned at that point. But Paul never made it to Spain.
Okay.
Paul never got all the way out there to Spain. That's that's what I think. So I don't.
No, you're right. I just sharpened my memory. Thank you very much.
Sure. Good point. Okay. All right. Oh,
wait a minute. I got to get my hand down. I got the wrong. What is going on here with the hand thing?
Anyway, I look forward to going through this book with you all, and I hope to learn from some of the insights that you all have. I'm sure many of you have been studying this way longer than I have, and you have some truth and insight into the text that I can learn from. And so I hope to learn from you, and maybe I can share a couple of things with you all, and this will be a fun journey. So if you're watching this and you want to be a part of this, we'd love to have you join us for fellowship. Check out the information in the description of the video to find out how to contact with us, and hopefully you're blessed by this and our future teachings. So thanks so much for watching.